Most people think a single choice doesn't matter until it quietly changes everything. The rain fell in thin, steady lines across the empty parking lot, turning the neon glow of the diner's sign into something soft, almost unreal, as if the night itself was holding its breath. And inside, Clara Hayes moved the way she always did, quiet, precise, unnoticed, her hands steady as she wiped down the last table of her shift, her mind already counting the hours until morning, until rent, until the next small problem waiting to be solved, when something caught her eye, just a flicker near the edge of the curb outside the glass window, a dark shape against the wet concrete, half hidden by shadow. And for a moment she didn't move, just watched, because she had learned long ago that the smallest things often carried the heaviest consequences. Then she stepped outside, the cold air brushing against her skin, the sound of distant traffic humming low, and there it was, a wallet, black leather, expensive enough to look out of place in a place like this, lying alone as if it had been forgotten by someone who never forgot anything. And Clara crouched down slowly, picking it up with careful fingers, the surface damp from the rain, the weight of it heavier than expected, and she didn't open it right away, not yet, her eyes scanning the empty lot, waiting, just in case someone came running back, breathless, searching, but no one did. The night remained still, indifferent, and only then did she step back inside, the warmth wrapping around her again as she stood beneath the soft, fluorescent light, opening the wallet just enough to see what mattered, a glimpse of a black card, a folded piece of paper, something metallic tucked deep inside. And her expression didn't change, not even slightly, because whatever this was, it didn't belong to her, and she knew that without needing to think about it. But somewhere across the city, several miles away, in a room filled with glass walls and quiet tension, Ethan Caldwell stood at the head of a long table, his reflection staring back at him from every surface, his hand resting near a document he hadn't signed yet, the weight of a decision pressing down on him in ways no one else in the room could fully understand. Voices around him speaking carefully measured words, numbers, projections, promises, all of it building toward a single moment. And yet something fell off, something just beyond reach, like a detail missing from a picture that should have been complete. And back at the diner, Clara closed the wallet, her thumb brushing lightly over the edge as if memorizing its shape, her gaze distant for a second longer than usual, because she had seen enough in life to recognize when something simple wasn't simple at all. And without a word to anyone, without hesitation or expectation, she reached for her coat, the quiet decision already made before it could be questioned. Because some people don't wait for the world to ask them to do the right thing, they just do it, even when no one is watching. Clara stepped out into the rain again, the wallet tucked securely inside her coat, the cold air sharper now, carrying that quiet weight that only came after midnight, when the city felt less like a place and more like a pause between decisions. And she walked with steady purpose, her shoes tapping lightly against the wet pavement, not rushing, not hesitating, because the address she had found inside the wallet was already fixed in her mind. A building downtown, one of those glass towers that seemed to touch the clouds and never looked the same twice. And as she moved through the nearly empty streets, passing dim storefronts and silent intersections, she did not think about the money that could have been inside, or the card that most people would never even see up close. She only thought about the person who would eventually realize it was gone. The moment of stillness that always followed loss, the small tightening in the chest, the quiet calculation of what could not be replaced. And miles away, that moment was already unfolding, because Ethan Caldwell had just reached for his wallet without looking, his hand moving with the kind of certainty that came from habit. And when it was not there, he paused, just for a second, his expression unchanged to anyone else in the room. But something behind his eyes shifted, something subtle and sharp, like a crack forming beneath polished glass. And the voices around him continued, numbers rising and falling, contracts waiting, expectations pressing forward. But his focus slipped, drifting backward through the last hour, the restaurant, the exit, the rain, and he knew, without saying it out loud, that the wallet was gone, truly gone, and the weight of that loss was not measured in dollars, but in what it carried, what it protected, what it confirmed. And back on the street, Clara reached the base of the tower, stopping just long enough to look up, the lights above stretching into the night. Each floor a world she did not belong to, at least not in the way people usually meant it. And inside, the lobby was quiet, polished marble reflecting soft gold light, a single security desk near the entrance, and as she stepped forward, the sound of her damp shoes echoed faintly. Drawing a glance from the man behind the desk, his eyes moving from her coat to her face, then to the wallet she held just slightly closer than before. And there it was again, that familiar look, not rude, not hostile, just certain that she was out of place, and Clara did not react. She simply stood there, calm, composed, her voice steady when she finally spoke, asking for Ethan Caldwell by name. And the pause that followed was longer than necessary, just long enough to say everything without saying anything at all, because people like her did not usually ask for people like him, and for a moment, it seemed like the night itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The man behind the desk did not answer right away, his fingers resting lightly on the surface as if waiting for a reason to move, his eyes narrowing just enough to measure her without appearing rude. And Clara stood there without shifting her weight, without filling the silence, because she had learned that people often revealed more in what they did not say than what they did. And after a few seconds that felt longer than they should have, he finally spoke, asking if she had an appointment. His tone neutral but firm, the kind of question that was not really a question at all, and Clara shook her head once. Calm, her voice soft but steady as she said that she needed to return something important, that it belonged to Mr. Caldwell. And for a moment the man's expression flickered, curiosity brushing against routine, but it faded quickly, replaced by policy, by protocol, by the invisible lines that separated people into categories that were rarely questioned. And he gestured slightly toward the door, explaining that anything left behind could be handled in the morning, that there were procedures for this kind of thing, that it was late, and Clara listened without interrupting, her gaze resting on him with quiet patience, because she understood what he was really saying, that she did not belong here, not at this hour, not with this request, not looking the way she did. And somewhere far above them, Ethan Caldwell stood by the glass wall of the conference room, the city stretching out beneath him like a grid of distant lights, his reflection faint against the dark, and the document on the table behind him remained unsigned. The voices in the room softer now, more cautious, because they could feel the shift even if they could not name it, the hesitation that had entered the space, and he replayed the last hour again, each detail sharper than before, the weight of what was missing growing heavier with every second, not just the wallet, but what it carried, what it confirmed. The small handwritten note he had folded himself, the one he had not shown anyone, the one that had kept him from making a decision he could not take back. And back in the lobby, Clara reached into her coat slowly, not as a gesture of urgency, but of clarity, and she placed the wallet gently on the desk between them, the leather still slightly damp, the edges worn just enough to show it had been carried often, not displayed, and she did not push it forward. She simply let it rest there, as if allowing the truth of it to speak for itself. And the man looked down at it, then back at her, something changing in his expression, subtle but real, because this was no longer a claim, it was evidence, and still, he hesitated, because even evidence had to pass through the same filters, the same doubts, the same quiet assumptions. And Clara finally said one more thing, not louder, not sharper, just enough, that there was a note inside that said do not trust them, and the effect was immediate, not dramatic, but precise, like a key turning in a lock, and the man's posture shifted, his hand moving toward the phone almost without thinking, because some details did not belong to chance, and upstairs, as if pulled by something unseen, Ethan turned slightly, his attention breaking from the skyline. A feeling settling in that he could not explain, only recognize, the kind that came right before everything changed. The phone call was brief, almost too brief for something that carried so much weight. The man behind the desk speaking in a lower tone now, his words careful, deliberate, repeating just enough of what Clara had said to make it clear that this was not routine. And on the other end, there was a pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to shift the air in the room. And upstairs, a quiet assistant stepped closer to Ethan, leaning in just enough to avoid interrupting the others, her voice controlled as she said that there was someone downstairs asking for him, that it could not wait, and Ethan did not respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the glass, on the reflection that did not quite match the man he had been an hour ago. And then he turned, slow but certain, because something in that message had cut through everything else, something precise, something that did not belong to coincidence. And as he walked out of the conference room, the conversations behind him softened into uncertainty, the deal hanging in the air without him, incomplete. And back in the lobby, Clara stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her hands relaxed at her sides, not expecting anything, not anticipating anything, simply waiting, because she had already done what she came to do. And the man behind the desk now watched her differently, not with doubt, but with a quiet recalibration, as if trying to understand how someone so easily overlooked could be carrying something so significant. And when the elevator doors finally opened, the sound was soft, almost lost beneath the hum of the building. But everyone noticed, and Ethan Caldwell stepped out, his presence filling the space not through force, but through the stillness that followed him, his gaze moving quickly, first to the desk, to the wallet, then to Clara. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because there are moments that do not need words to be understood, only recognition. And he walked forward, each step measured, his hand reaching for the wallet with a familiarity that confirmed what no one else could have known. And when he opened it, his eyes went straight to the folded note, still there, untouched, exactly where he had left it. And something in his expression shifted, not relief, not exactly, but something deeper, something steadier, like a line being redrawn in a place that had almost been erased. And he looked up at Clara then, really looked, not at her clothes, not at the rain still clinging to her coat, but at the quiet certainty in her eyes. And he asked her one question, simple, direct, why she brought it back. And Clara did not answer right away, not because she needed time, but because the question itself did not require complexity. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact. She said that it was his, and for a second, the room seemed to pause around that answer, because it was so simple it felt unfamiliar. And Ethan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, his grip on the wallet tightening just slightly before relaxing again. And somewhere above them, the unsigned document remained on the table, waiting. But now, for the first time that night, the decision connected to it was no longer unclear, because sometimes it is not information that changes everything. It is the moment someone reminds you what you already knew but almost ignored. For a few seconds, no one moved. Not the man behind the desk, not the assistant standing near the elevator, not even Clara, who simply held Ethan's gaze without expectation. And it was in that stillness that something subtle but irreversible settled into place, because the answer she had given was not impressive, not strategic, not designed to gain anything. It was simply true, and Ethan recognized that immediately, not as a statement, but as a standard, the kind he had not heard in a long time. And he looked down again at the wallet in his hand, at the note folded neatly inside, the words he had written earlier now carrying a different weight, because they were no longer just a warning, they were a reminder. And without saying anything else, he turned, his movement calm but decisive, and began walking back toward the elevator, the direction of his steps saying more than any explanation could. And as the doors closed behind him, the quiet tension in the lobby shifted into something else, something lighter, as if the outcome had already begun to change even before anyone could see how. And Clara remained where she was for another moment, her shoulders relaxed, her expression unchanged, because for her, the moment had already ended the second she placed the wallet on the desk. Everything after that belonged to someone else, and she turned, slightly, ready to leave. The night outside still waiting, the rain softer now, almost fading. But before she could take more than a step, the man behind the desk spoke again, his voice different this time, less guarded, asking her to wait just a moment, not out of authority, but out of something closer to respect. And Clara paused, not because she expected anything, but because she had no reason not to. And upstairs, the conference room had fallen into a careful silence as Ethan returned, his presence sharper now, more focused, the hesitation that had lingered before replaced by clarity. And without sitting down, without reopening the discussion, he reached for the document, his hand steady as he closed it instead of signing. The simple motion cutting through the assumptions that had filled the room, and the reactions came quickly but quietly, questions forming, expressions shifting, but Ethan did not explain. Not immediately, because some decisions did not require debate, only conviction. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled. He said that the deal was off, that they would reassess, that there were details that had been overlooked, and no one challenged him. Not because they agreed, but because they could see that something had changed in him, something that was no longer negotiable. And back in the lobby, Clara stood near the entrance now, the glass doors reflecting the dim lights of the street, her hand resting lightly on the handle as she prepared to step back into the night, when the elevator chimed again. And this time, Ethan stepped out with a different expression, not rushed, not distracted, but present, fully aware of the moment he had nearly missed. And as he approached her, there was no audience, no performance, just two people standing at the edge of a quiet decision. And he stopped a few feet away, his voice lower now, more personal, as he said thank you, not as a formality, but as something that carried weight, because he understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone else in that building, that what she had returned to him was not just a wallet. It was the space to choose differently. And Clara gave a small nod, not dismissive, not impressed, just acknowledging the moment for what it was. And without asking for anything, without waiting for anything, she opened the door and stepped back into the night, leaving behind a silence that felt, for the first time in a long while, like clarity. The rain had softened into a quiet mist by the time Clara stepped onto the sidewalk, the city no longer loud or demanding, but distant, like it had decided to give her a moment of space. And she walked without looking back, her pace steady, her mind already shifting back to the small, practical things that filled her days, the next shift, the bills waiting on her kitchen counter, the rhythm of a life that did not pause for moments like the one she had just left behind, because for her, nothing had changed, at least not in the way most people would define it. And yet, several floors above, everything had, because Ethan Caldwell stood alone now in his office, the lights dimmed, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass, and the wallet rested on his desk, open, the note unfolded, its simple message no longer just a warning, but a question he could not ignore. And he replayed the night again, not the meeting, not the numbers, but the moment in the lobby, the way Clara had stood there without hesitation, without calculation, as if the decision she made had never been a decision at all. And that unsettled him more than anything else, because he realized how rare that kind of clarity had become in his world, where every choice was weighed, negotiated, adjusted until it barely resembled its original form. And he leaned back slightly, his eyes closing for just a second, as if trying to measure something that could not be quantified. And then he reached for his phone, not to call a partner, not to reopen the deal, but to give a different kind of instruction, his voice calm as he spoke, asking for information, not about a company, not about a contract, but about a person, Clara Hayes, the waitress from the diner. And the request was simple, but it carried the same quiet weight as everything else that night. Because he was not searching for leverage, he was searching for understanding. And across the city, Clara reached her apartment, the small space warm but modest, the kind of place that held more effort than comfort. And she stepped inside, setting her coat aside, the night already fading into memory, not because it was unimportant, but because she had never been someone who held on to moments expecting them to change her life. And as she poured herself a glass of water, the sound of it steady in the quiet room, her phone buzzed once on the table, a notification she had not expected, and she glanced at it briefly, her expression unchanged as she read the message. An unknown number, a short sentence, asking if she had made it home safely. And for a moment, she simply looked at the screen, not surprised, not impressed, just aware, because even that gesture, simple as it was, belonged to a world she did not assume would reach into hers. And she set the phone down without answering, not out of indifference, but because some things did not need an immediate response. And back in his office, Ethan stood again by the window, the reflection staring back at him now clearer than before. And for the first time that night, the silence did not feel like pressure, it felt like space, the kind that allowed something new to take shape, not built on urgency, not driven by fear, but grounded in something quieter, something that did not need to be announced to be real. Morning arrived without ceremony, the light slipping quietly through the narrow window of Clara's apartment, pale and steady, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before, and she moved through her routine the same way she always did. Simple, efficient, her mind already focused on the hours ahead, the shifts starting at 8, the tables that would fill and empty, the small conversations that never lingered. And when she reached for her phone again, the message from the night before was still there, unread in the sense that it had not been answered, not because she was ignoring it, but because she had not yet decided what it meant, and she set the phone back down, choosing action over reflection, because that was how she had always navigated things that did not have immediate answers. And across the city, Ethan Caldwell stood in a different kind of morning, one filled with calls that had already begun, updates on the deal he had walked away from, questions from partners who did not understand. And yet his responses were measured, consistent, leaving no space for doubt, because the decision he made the night before had settled into something solid, something that did not shift under pressure. And when the call ended, he remained still for a moment, the office quiet again, his gaze drifting briefly to the wallet on his desk, now closed, its presence less urgent but no less important. And then he did something unexpected, something that did not belong to his usual schedule. He canceled the rest of his morning meetings, not abruptly, not dramatically, just a quiet rearrangement, as if making room for something that had not been part of the plan until now. And an hour later, the bell above the diner door rang softly as Clara stepped inside, the familiar warmth greeting her, the scent of coffee already in the air, the low hum of early customers filling the space with that steady, ordinary rhythm she knew so well. And she tied her apron the same way she always did, her movements unhurried, her expression calm, because whatever had happened the night before had not changed this place, had not changed her role in it. And she moved from table to table with quiet precision, refilling cups, taking orders, listening just enough to respond, never more than necessary, until the door opened again, and this time, the shift in the room was subtle, almost imperceptible, but real, because some presences carried a different kind of weight. And Ethan Caldwell stepped inside, his suit still, sharp, his posture composed. But there was something else now, something less distant, less insulated, and he paused just inside the entrance, not looking for attention, but observing, taking in the space as if seeing it for the first time, the worn edges of the booths, the soft clink of plates, the quiet focus of the people working around him. And when his eyes found Clara, there was no surprise, no hesitation, only recognition. And she looked up at him the same way she looked at any customer. Steady, neutral, acknowledging without assuming. And for a moment, neither of them moved, because the distance between two very different worlds does not disappear all at once. It shifts, slowly, in moments like this. And Ethan took a step forward, his voice calm as he greeted her, not with authority, not with expectation, but with the simple tone of someone who understood that whatever came next would not be decided by status or circumstance, but by something far quieter, something that had already begun the moment she chose to return what was never hers. Clara did not rush toward him, did not change her pace or her posture. She simply finished placing a cup of coffee on a nearby table before turning fully to face him, her expression composed, her voice even as she greeted him the same way she greeted everyone else, asking if he would like a table. And there was something in that simplicity that caught Ethan off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it was unchanged, untouched by everything that had happened the night before. And he nodded once, his gaze steady as he followed her to a booth near the window, the light of the morning settling softly across the table between them. And when he sat down, he placed the wallet gently on the surface, not as a possession, but as a reminder. And Clara noticed it without reacting, her hands already reaching for her notepad, asking what he would like to order, her tone professional, neutral, as if the conversation had not already begun somewhere else. And Ethan paused, just for a second, because he realized that whatever he had expected from this moment did not match what was actually happening. There was no recognition of status, no shift in tone, no attempt to turn the situation into something more than it was. And he ordered something simple, coffee and toast, his voice quieter than it usually was in rooms where people listened closely, and Clara wrote it down with the same careful precision she applied to every order, then turned to leave. But he spoke again, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to stop the moment from closing. Asking if she had seen the message he sent, and Clara paused, her back still, partly turned, considering the question not for its content, but for its weight, and then she turned back, meeting his gaze directly, her answer honest and unguarded as she said that she had, and that she chose not to answer yet. And there was no apology in her voice, no hesitation, only clarity, and Ethan nodded slowly, not offended, not surprised, because somewhere in him, he had expected that too, expected that she would respond on her own terms, not his, and that realization settled into him with a kind of quiet respect that did not need to be spoken, and Clara stepped away then, moving back into the rhythm of the diner, the steady flow of small tasks that did not pause for conversations like this. And Ethan watched her for a moment longer than necessary, not studying her, not analyzing, just observing, the way she moved with intention, the way she did not rush even when there was more to do. And something in that pace contrasted sharply with the world he had just stepped out of, where everything was urgent, everything was accelerated, everything demanded immediate response. And when she returned with his coffee, setting it down gently in front of him, their eyes met again, and this time, there was no question, no expectation, just a shared understanding that whatever this moment was becoming, it was not built on obligation or imbalance. It was built on something far more uncommon, something that neither of them needed to define in order to recognize. And as the morning continued around them, the quiet space between two very different lives began, slowly, to feel less like distance and more like a bridge that neither of them had planned to cross. The morning carried on with its quiet rhythm, plates moving, coffee refilling, conversations rising and falling in soft waves, and yet something beneath it had shifted, something that could not be seen, but could be felt in the way Ethan remained seated longer than he intended, his untouched toast growing cold as his attention drifted not to his phone, not to the schedule waiting for him, but to the space around him, the simplicity of it, the absence of urgency. And Clara moved through it all, without interruption, her focus steady, her presence consistent, never lingering, never rushing. And when she returned to his table again, it was not because he had asked, but because the moment required it, and she asked if there was anything else he needed, her tone unchanged, and Ethan looked at her for a second before answering, not with a request, but with a question, asking how long she had worked there. And Clara gave a simple answer, a few years, nothing more, because she did not explain her life in detail unless there was a reason, and he nodded, absorbing that answer as if it carried more than it revealed, because in his world, people did not stay in the same place without a plan to leave it, and yet here she was, steady, grounded, as if the place did not define her, and that contrast stayed with him. And after a brief pause, he said something else, quieter this time, that he had canceled the deal. And Clara did not react the way most people would expect. There was no surprise, no visible curiosity. She simply listened, her eyes steady, as if she understood that decisions like that were never simple. And he continued, explaining just enough that the note in the wallet had been a reminder that something about the agreement had never felt right, and that returning the wallet had given him the moment he needed to stop, to reconsider. And Clara stood there, not impressed, not distant, just present, because to her, the outcome was not the purpose, it was the action itself. And after a second, she said that he made the decision, not her, her voice calm, not dismissing what had happened, but placing it where it belonged. And that sentence settled into Ethan in a way he did not expect, because it removed something, the idea that he owed her something in return, the imbalance that often followed moments like this, and instead, it left something clearer, something more equal, and he let out a small breath, almost a quiet acknowledgement of that truth. And for the first time that morning, he smiled, not broadly, not for effect, but naturally, as if the tension he had carried had finally loosened. And Clara gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in approval, just in recognition. And then she turned to continue her work, because the moment, like all moments in her world, had its place, and once it passed, it made room for the next. And Ethan remained there for a while longer, the noise of the diners settling around him, his thoughts no longer racing, no longer calculating, just steady. And when he finally stood to leave, placing cash on the table without drawing attention to it, he glanced once more toward Clara, who was already focused on another table, her attention fully present there. And he did not interrupt, did not call her over, because something told him that whatever this connection was, it was not meant to be forced. It was meant to be understood, slowly, in moments that did not need to be claimed to be real. And as he stepped outside into the now clear morning, the air felt different, not because the world had changed, but because he had, and that difference, quiet as it was enough to begin something neither of them had planned, but both had already stepped into without realizing it. The day moved forward without waiting for anyone, the diner filling and emptying in its steady rhythm. And Clara continued her work the way she always did, present in each small task, never carrying the weight of the last moment into the next, because that was how she kept things simple, how she kept things clear. And yet, even in that consistency, something had shifted, not in what she did, but in what she noticed, the way her eyes paused just a fraction longer when the door opened, the way her thoughts returned briefly to the conversation that had already passed, not because she expected anything from it, but because it had left something behind, something quiet, something unresolved. And across the city, Ethan moved through a different kind of day, one filled with consequences, calls that carried confusion, partners who questioned his decision, advisors who tried to reframe it. But his responses remained steady, grounded in a certainty that had not been there before. And when someone asked him directly why he had walked away from a deal that promised measurable gain, he did not mention the note, did not mention the night. He simply said that it was not right. And the simplicity of that answer left no room for argument. Because it was not based on numbers, it was based on something that could not be negotiated. And later that afternoon, he found himself standing outside the diner again, not out of habit, not out of obligation, but because something in him was not finished with that place, or with the person inside it. And when he stepped through the door, the familiar sound of the bell marked his return, but this time, he did not pause, did not observe from a distance. He moved forward with quiet intention, and Clara noticed him again, not with surprise, but with recognition, the kind that did not need explanation. And when she approached his table, her expression remained the same, calm, professional, asking what she could get for him. And Ethan did not answer right away, not because he did not know, but because he was choosing his words more carefully than he usually did. And finally, he said that he was not there for the food. And there was no assumption in his tone, no expectation of how she would respond, only honesty. And Clara looked at him for a moment, not reacting, just listening, because honesty, when it appeared, deserved at least that much. And he continued, saying that he had spent the day thinking about what had happened, about the choice she made, and about what it revealed, not about her life, but about his own. And there was a pause after that, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something that neither of them rushed to define. And Clara finally responded, her voice even, asking what he intended to do with that realization, not as a challenge, not as a test, but as a simple question. And Ethan considered it for a second before answering, saying that he was still figuring that out, but that he knew it started with not ignoring it. And that answer settled between them, quiet, unfinished, but real. And for the first time since he had entered, Clara allowed a slight shift in her expression, not a smile, not fully, but something close, something that acknowledged the effort without praising it. And then she nodded once, as if accepting that as enough for now, because, in her world, change was not proven by words, it was shown in what came next. And as the afternoon light filtered through the window beside them, the space between two very different lives felt less like a distance to be measured and more like something that could be crossed, slowly, one honest moment at a time. The light outside had begun to shift again, the late afternoon sun stretching longer across the diner windows, casting soft reflections on the worn surfaces. And inside, the steady rhythm of the place continued, unchanged in its pace, unchanged in its purpose. And yet something within that rhythm now carried a quiet awareness, not visible to anyone else, but present in the space between Clara and Ethan as they stood across from each other, neither rushing the moment, neither forcing it forward. And Ethan leaned slightly against the edge of the table, not in a way that claimed the space, but in a way that settled into it, his voice calm as he spoke again, saying that he had spent years building things that looked right on paper, decisions that made sense in rooms filled with agreement. but that somewhere along the way, he had stopped asking whether they felt right, and Clara listened, her posture still, her eyes steady, because she understood that what he was saying was not about business. It was about recognition, and recognition, when it finally arrived, did not need to be rushed, and he continued, explaining that walking away from the deal had consequences, real ones, not immediate losses, but shifts that would take time to unfold, and for the first time, there was no defense in his tone, no justification, only acceptance, and Clara nodded once, not offering reassurance, not offering doubt, just acknowledging the reality of what he was saying, because in her world, consequences were not something to avoid, they were something to carry, and after a brief pause, she asked him a question, simple, direct, asking whether he would make the same choice again if it cost him more than he expected, and the question did not come with pressure, it came with clarity, the kind that did not allow easy answers, and Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze shifting slightly as he considered it, not calculating, not rehearsing, but actually thinking, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. He said that he did not know, but that for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out, and that answer settled into the space between them with a different kind of weight, not complete, not perfect, but honest, and Clara held his gaze for a moment longer, as if measuring not the words, but the intention behind them, and then she gave a small nod, the same quiet acknowledgement she had given before, because in her world, honesty was not something to praise, it was something to respect, and the moment lingered just long enough to be understood before it naturally began to move forward, the sound of another customer calling for service, the clink of a cup being set down, the subtle reminders that life did not pause for reflection. And Clara stepped back slightly, her attention returning to the room, to the work that grounded her, and Ethan straightened, not with the posture of someone returning to control, but with the awareness of someone who had just stepped out of it, and for a second, he remained there, watching the space. As it continued without him, the simplicity of it, the clarity of it, and then he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small card, placing it gently on the edge of the table, not sliding it toward her, not insisting, just leaving it there as an option, and he said that if she ever wanted something different, something beyond the diner, she could call, not as an offer to change her life, but as an opportunity she could choose or ignore, and Clara glanced at the card briefly, her expression unchanged, because she understood what it represented, not power, not escape, but possibility, and she did not reach for it right away, not rejecting it, not accepting it, simply allowing it to exist in the moment without deciding its place yet, and Ethan gave a small nod, as if that was enough, because for the first time, he was not expecting an immediate answer, and as he turned to leave, the space he stepped out of did not close behind him. It remained, quiet and open, waiting for whatever choice would come next, from either of them, in their own time. The card remained where he left it, resting quietly at the edge of the table as the door closed behind him, the soft chime fading into the background noise of the diner. And for a moment, Clara did not move toward it, did not reach for it. She simply continued what she had been doing, because that was how she approached most things that carried weight. She allowed them to exist before deciding what they meant. And the hours passed in their usual rhythm, the late afternoon turning into evening, the light outside dimming slowly as customers came and went, each one bringing small conversations, small needs, none of which demanded more than what she was already used to giving. And yet, every time she passed that table, her eyes registered the card, not with curiosity, but with awareness, the same way she had noticed the wallet the night before, something present, something waiting, and eventually, when the diner grew quieter, when the rush softened into a steady calm, she paused beside the table, her hand resting lightly near the edge, and she picked up the card, not with hesitation, not with urgency, simply with intention, and she turned it over once, reading the name she already knew, the number beneath it, the clean simplicity of something that represented a different kind of world, one that operated on decisions much larger than the ones she made each day. And yet, in that moment, the contrast did not feel overwhelming. It felt balanced, as if both realities could exist without one diminishing the other. And she slipped the card into the pocket of her apron, not as a commitment, not as a rejection, but as a Possibility she did not need to define yet, and across the city, Ethan stood in his office once more, the evening settling in. The skyline lit with quiet precision, and the conversations from earlier had already begun to reshape themselves, new plans forming, different directions being considered, and he moved through it all with the same clarity he had found the night before, not forcing outcomes, not chasing control, but allowing decisions to take shape based on something steadier than urgency. And for a brief moment, his hand brushed against his pocket, the absence of the card he had given away noticeable, not as a loss, but as a marker, a small shift in the way he approached things, and he did not reach for his phone, did not check for a message, because for the first time, he understood that not every connection needed to be followed immediately. Some needed space, needed time, needed to unfold without pressure. And back in the diner, Clara finished her shift the way she always did, wiping down the last table, stacking the chairs with quiet efficiency, the familiar routine grounding her in the present. And when she stepped outside again, the air was cooler now, the streetlights casting long reflections across the pavement, and she paused for just a second, her hand brushing lightly against the pocket where the card rested, not as a reminder, but as an acknowledgement. And then she walked forward, her pace steady, her path unchanged, because whatever that small piece of paper represented, it did not alter who she was. It only added something new to consider, something that did not need to be decided tonight. And as the city moved quietly around her, the distance between two very different lives no longer felt like something fixed. It felt like something that could shift, not through force, not through expectation, but through choices made the same way they always had been, quietly, deliberately, and without the need to prove anything to anyone. Weeks passed in the quiet way time often does when no one is watching closely, not marked by dramatic change, but by small, steady moments that gradually reshape everything beneath the surface. And Clara continued her life much as she always had, moving through her shifts with the same calm precision, her days measured not by ambition, but by consistency, by the simple act of doing what needed to be done without expecting anything in return. And yet, something had settled within her, not restlessness, not desire, but awareness, the kind that comes when a moment lingers long enough to become part of how you see the world. And the card remained in her pocket for days before she ever took it out again, not forgotten, just not rushed, because she understood that some decisions lose their meaning when they are made too quickly. And when she finally held it again one evening, standing by her window as the city lights stretched out beyond her, she did not feel pulled in one direction or another. She simply felt ready to choose, not out of curiosity, not out of need, but out of clarity. And she made a call, her voice as steady as it had been that night in the lobby, and across the city, Ethan answered without hesitation, not surprised, not relieved, just present, as if he had understood all along that if the moment returned, it would do so on its own terms. And what followed was not a sudden transformation, not a dramatic shift from one life to another, but something quieter, something more deliberate, conversations that did not revolve around opportunity, but around perspective, meetings that did not feel like transactions, but like exchanges of thought. And over time, Clara stepped into a different space, not leaving behind who she was, but expanding it, bringing the same quiet clarity into rooms that had long been driven by noise. And Ethan, in turn, found himself building differently, not faster, not bigger, but with a steadiness that had been missing before, decisions no longer made in isolation, but grounded in something that did not need to be justified to feel right. And the company he had nearly lost did not just recover, it changed, shaped not by a single moment, but by the shift that moment created. And still, through all of it, Clara remained who she had always been, composed, thoughtful, grounded in a dignity that did not depend on where she stood, and on a quiet evening months later, she returned to the diner, not because she had to, but because some places are not left behind, they are carried forward. And as she stood there, the familiar sounds surrounding her, the soft clink of plates, the low hum of conversation, she smiled, not because everything had changed, but because it had not needed to. And somewhere in that simplicity was the truth that had shaped everything from the very beginning, that the smallest choices, the ones no one sees, often carry the greatest weight, not because they are recognized, but because they are right. And if this story left something with you, perhaps it is this: that integrity does not ask for attention. It does not demand reward. It simply waits for the moment when it matters most. And when that moment comes, it is enough. And maybe, just maybe, the next quiet choice you make will carry more than you ever expected. So if you have ever believed that small actions do not matter, take a second to sit with that feeling and share what it means to you. Because sometimes the stories we carry forward are the ones that change us the most.